Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hello and welcome to Through a Scottish Prism. Today we're very lucky to be speaking to Michelle Ferns. Michelle Ferns is a candidate for Deputy Leader of the Alba Party. Michelle is a Dundee girl like myself and grew up in Dundee in the 80s. She comes from a very working class background and she grew up in one of the worst areas of deprivation in Dundee at that time. It was blighted by poverty. Michelle has fought all her life for everything she has. Nothing's been given to Michelle. She's a real fighter. She moved to Glasgow and she found herself helping people in her community who were having problems with the benefit system or public services or council services. And she became an advocate for them. She helped them with their forms. And through this advocacy, she realized she could do some good for her community. And that's why she moved into politics and she became a councillor to help people like herself, working class people, to make sense of the system and to have a better life. As a councillor in Glasgow, one of the very high points of Michelle's career was the settling of the equal pay dispute, where women had been getting paid less than men for doing a very similar job. This was settled by the SNP administration after about 10 years of fight by the women. Michelle is also concerned herself with ensuring better and fairer working conditions for the employees at Glasgow Council, which is the largest workforce in Glasgow. She had a focus on looking after people that were disabled or BAME or long-term carers, mainly females, and people with long-term illnesses. So Michelle is very concerned with social justice. So my first question to Michelle is, how do you see, what's your vision for an independent Scotland?
To put quite simply, a fairer Scotland, a more inclusive Scotland, and that's easy to say, but how do you deliver that? How do you deliver a broader, true diversity across our parliaments? How do we make sure that we have a parliament that broadly represents the people that live in Scotland? And that means a diversity not just across gender, but specifically for class. Holyrood and Westminster is absolutely chock-a-block with experienced, polished, professional politicians. It doesn't feel as if it represents my needs or the needs of the community that I represent and live in. If we actually really want to have diversity, we have to be speaking to everyone in Scotland. Everybody has to understand that any fairer Scotland has to be fairer for all of us, not some of us, all of us.
So being a working class woman, you obviously know all about poverty and structural inequalities. It sometimes feels today in Scotland that nobody's really interested in that anymore. They see equality about pronouns, not about poverty. So I'm wondering, what you see as the barriers to working class people getting into politics, like yourself. What barriers did you find?
Part of the reason that there isn't that representation in terms of class across the parliament is for a number of reasons, but the biggest one is the most simple, the latent snobbery in a lot of cases, not overt, because politicians like to virtue signal about the fact they're speaking for the most deprived communities. Unfortunately, they don't really encourage those people to speak up for themselves. They consider themselves to be the bridge. And that goes to a psyche in Scottish working class people where we're not brought up with the confidence to think that we can speak and be heard. That's deliberate, I think, because all of the language that we hear, the language of authority, the language of reason, is said in a BBC Scotland or a BBC England accent, and we're taught to cringe at the way we speak. Which is ridiculous. It's this kind of, and if you're working class and eloquent and can put forward, or articulate and can put forward an argument, it's almost as if you're treated like you're an anomaly. You have someone who's speaking sense from a housing scheme, the amount of snobbery and condescension in those kind of attitudes is really as much there today as it's ever been. There's this kind of attitude with working class people. If you get into a position of power, you're almost supposed to be grateful for being there, for being allowed entry into, this wee elite group, almost as if someone's left the door to first class open and the cleaners wandered in.
Yeah, I really understand that. Coming from a working class background myself, I do know that there's a club that you'll never really be admitted to. Fortunate thing is we don't really want to be a member of that club. We want to have the political power to make the difference for all of people in Scotland, not just the elite few. So my next question to you is, how do we solve this? How do we get more people into politics and actually get political power for the working class?
It's not going to be simple. It's nuanced and complex, but I think part of it is seeing it's not just with working class, it's across all of the protected characteristics or communities of interest. You have to see people like you in those positions of power. That's true for employment and any job. You have to see that there's a space for people like you, and you have to see that you don't have to lob off huge parts of your personality to fit in, to change your language, to make yourself more acceptable. Why would we? Why would we want to curate and fashion ourselves into something that's more acceptable to our opposition? Surely the clue's in the name. We're the opposition. We're supposed to be different. We're supposed to be putting forward new points of view, innovative ways of thinking, bringing forward ideas that maybe haven't been heard before. Definitely it starts with seeing people like you there.
So of course, you've had a lot of experience of poverty and having to struggle and fight every day, and you've helped other people. I wanted to know what we can do about poverty in Scotland and how we can change things, because I don't see things are getting a lot better. In fact, they're stagnating or going backwards. If you look at attainment or look at drug deaths, and the gap between rich and poor seems to be as wide as ever, and devolution doesn't seem to be cutting it.
The abhorrent poverty that still exists in Scotland in 2021, in such a country, such abundant natural resources and wealth, the fact there's such a big divide between the haves and the have-nots, and that's only got wider over the last 10 years. But I think particularly the effects of lockdown have made that really apparent to everyone. The only way to really tackle the deep-rooted inequality, it'll be surprised to no one to hear me say, is to have all the levers over all of the powers in our own country. Their devolution is not going to be able to tackle the deep-rooted generational causes of poverty. That's going to take all of the levers of the power that we can have, as well as the political will to tackle those things. The problem with being a devolved government is sometimes this is on the back of, I might modestly suggest, politicians being in position for too long. You look across the country and I think there's probably an idea, there's good sense behind why politicians in senior positions only do 2 terms or 3 terms, because the problem is you go in ready to shake up and be the plucky underdog and shake up the status quo. But when you're there for 2, 3, 4 terms, you become the establishment you're supposed to be challenging. And you have a very nice lifestyle. You become, as I say, I wouldn't say part of the problem, but that energy that you've had to shake things up sometimes is directed more towards keeping your position of power.
Well, nobody can say that about you, Michelle, because you left a position of power in Glasgow SNP Group and you made yourself poorer to join Alba because of your principles. Why do you think MPs and MSPs are so weak and so unprincipled, and all they seem to care about is maintaining power as an end in itself? They're not seeking power to do anything with it. They're just in power because they want to be in power.
I think part of the problem with anyone being in position for too long is it becomes detached and aloof from the people that they're representing, and also that there's a temptation for people to look up to the leadership and get things, I think, a bit backwards. When we looked at our declaration at Arbroath and the declaration of the Alba Party that arrived in our membership packs, what was really clear to me reading both of those is that our politicians and our leadership are the custodians of the power of people of Scotland, not the source of it. The idea that one person speaks for everyone or one party that speaks for everyone is fundamentally undemocratic, and I would suggest un-Scottish.
So, Michelle, I know one of the reasons that you left the SNP was because they would not respect women and women's right to be heard, and their erosion of women's rights, women's sex-based rights. And we see you were right, because Nicola Sturgeon has just done a deal with the Greens, and they plan to push through self-ID, which is where a man can claim to be a woman and he has to be accepted as a woman with no gatekeeping. This parliamentary term. She's no mandate for this. She's not mandated to deliver self-ID. She's mandated to deliver independence, but she has no intention of delivering, does no work on, just pays lip service to, we call it carrots. Meanwhile, her priority, which was not in her manifesto, self-ID was not in her manifesto, is to push through self-ID through Parliament this term. So we're going to have like a massive fight, and we're going to fight. Nicola Sturgeon is not going to get to do this in the dark. Everybody's going to know what she's doing, and people are going to be rightly angry about it. And I have just no time for her at all. She's a massive disappointment, and she's just turned out to be completely corrupt, in my opinion, completely corrupt. So, to the question, how do we solve the problem of women's rights, and how do we fight back against the government?
I think part of the problem with the whole very heated and what's became very a toxic debate about what should be a very simple and absolutely not controversial thing to say, which is that biological fact is in fact fact. It's not my interpretation. It's not women's and radical feminist interpretation of biological fact. It's sciences. I think part of the problem is the debates became so toxic. Positions have become so absolute that there's absolutely no room for compromise or nuance. And although I think that conversation around this absolutely does have to happen, it can't be dragged on to the territory of being pro-women means you're anti-trans. That mutually exclusive argument is absurd. That's like saying being pro-tea is being anti-coffee. You know, that argument that there is no debate and that women cannot speak about their lived experience as women, that can't be acceptable, especially when we're talking about the rightfully the focus that have been on the rights of women and girls across the world this week. That can't be right. The women in Scotland are excluded from the conversation about what their lives are like today, but the fact that sex-based violence absolutely exists, the fact that sex pay gaps absolutely exist, the fact that FGM absolutely exists. Like your biological reality can't be denied by what you feel in your head. Facts are not overridden by feelings. It doesn't mean that you can't feel what you feel. And I think, Denise, partly for me, which has really been exasperating for the last couple of years, is that women are constantly told to be kind in this debate. But it's came to mean being kind has came to mean being quiet. And I and many other women in Scotland will absolutely refuse to do that. I don't accept that, let's be honest, that lots of young men get to tell middle-aged women what kind of women they're allowed to be. And I'm not allowed to have an opinion on that. Otherwise, I'm classified as a transphobe, which I am absolutely not. Trans rights, those with GRA certificates rights, are absolutely protected in equalities law. And I agree with that principle. And I would uphold and fight for that principle. The conversation we're having is around self-ID. And this idea that you can be something because you feel you are. I think that's deeply insulting. Last week I went for my smear. The month before I went for my breast examination. I'm dealing every day with the effects of perimenopause. They are biological facts of my biological sex. I can't identify out of those. These things are real, they're immutable.
Of course, the Scottish Government would have you believe that sex is just a feeling in somebody's head.
Sex is not a feeling in somebody's head, it's a biological reality. Women know that because women are subject to FGM, sexual violence, forced marriage, corrective rape, selective abortion, sexual harassment, prostitution, pornography, objectification, sex trafficking, maternity discrimination, unequal pay, disproportionate caring responsibilities, domestic violence, financial exploitation and control, political underrepresentation, inadequate healthcare, limited control of their own bodies and reproductive choices, systemic barriers to occupational progress and promotion, silence, belittling, or any of the other ways in which sexism, misogyny, and the patriarchy are enforced. However inadequate a shorthand sex-based rights might be, but they're a hallmark of a civilized society. Until sexism is eradicated, sex-based rights are indispensable.
I totally agree. I don't think sexism will ever be eradicated, so we're always going to need sex-based rights. So you told us that you've been supported independence your entire life, that you grew up in Dundee when Gordon Wilson was the MP, and that you're a fundamentalist in that you don't want to gradually get more power to the Scottish Parliament, which sort of seems off the table anyway, and that you want to move as fast as possible on independence, and that independence is really the only solution for Scotland. So I'd like to get your opinion on how you feel things have gone for the independence movement since 2014.
Given that the average turnout for the last 5 elections has only been 55%, you're looking at almost half of the population in Scotland that have valid votes choosing not to turn out and vote. Why? Why is that? Specifically when you look at the demographic of people who are not voting. So more likely to be younger and middle-aged people, but crucially people on lower incomes. Ironically, the people that are most likely to interact with the state and need the services that politicians are delivering them. So why is that? Why are those people not turning out to exercise their democratic power? Well, when I ask people on the streets, the main answer you get to that is a deep mistrust in politicians of all parties. A feeling that there's a failure to recognise them, and that politics, in fact, attracts the wrong type of people, instead of people who want to represent their communities and society that they live in. They're seen very much as serving themselves, their pensions and their party politics, rather than the people that they're supposed to be representing.
Yeah, that's true. If you look at someone like Pete Wishart boasting about his 20-year career of failure, and a lot of the MPs and MSPs are incredibly out of touch with the independence movement and independence voters, to the extent that they just don't want to listen to them. They block them on social media. They try and close down the debate, and they're just too comfortable.
I think there really needs to be an acknowledgement that it is a movement. It's a broad church of people of all parties and none. Lots of people who lend their vote to parties that are pursuing independence, not necessarily because they believe in the everyday policies and governance of those parties, but because they want to pursue independence. And I think this has been part of the problem why the independence movement has become a little bit moribund, in my view, in the last couple of years. And I think part of that is, the main part is that the case for independence has stopped being made. And I think that's very definitely a failure of leadership of the independence movement. But what we're told all the time is that the SNP are the independence movement. So I fundamentally reject the principle, first of all, that any political party or politician or individual has ownership of the independence movement. Independence when it happens, will belong to all of the people of Scotland and not any political party. But if you want to take that view that the SNP own independence, well, they also own then accountability for why we don't have it. So if you want to be seen as the people who are leading the charge for independence, why are you not making the case for it? Why have you not moved support for independence any further forward than when we were sitting at 2014? If you want the credit for being the leader, then you have to be accountable for what you've delivered. And there's this whole idea and ethos that you can't possibly question the SNP, because if you do, you're questioning the need for independence itself. That's absolute absurd and nonsense. If you put yourself in the position of being First Minister of Scotland, you absolutely will be held accountable, not because you're SNP or because you're a female, because you're the First Minister. You'll be accountable for delivering the promises that you made to people who voted for you on the basis that you would deliver what you were promising. So I think a lot of people in the SNP have to decide, do the SNP own the independence movement? If you do, and you want us to judge you on your leadership, I have to say, you've not delivered what you promised. You've had multiple mandates from the people of Scotland. You will never have better conditions than you had on the back of Brexit to take that to the people. You failed to make that case. Or you have to acknowledge that independence doesn't belong to the SNP. It belongs to those of all political parties and none who have a vested interest collectively in seeing a fairer Scotland for all of us.
So the Alba Party's overwhelming priority is independence for Scotland, and to achieve independence as soon as possible by any democratic means. So how do you think we're going to get to independence?
How do we get to independence? How do we get to independence without waiting for permission or approval from a parliament in London that will never give it? I think the fundamental thing is the power lies in the hands of Scotland and Scotland's voters. It will be for us to make that decision if and when and how. I think part of the problem is we've bought into this thing where we cede authority to the Westminster Parliament to let us know when they think the time is right for us. And to square that, we've got a Scottish government that seem to be telling us all the time that now is not the time. I'm pretty sure as nationalists, your job is to tell us this is the time. And if this isn't the time, then when is? When is the time? I don't think that we can wait, and I certainly don't think we can wait on permission that's never coming. We have to, if there is no meaningful and substantive action in bringing forward a referendum, I feel strongly in the next 2 years, we have to make the next election a plebiscite. The Section 30 has never been used in any other country in the world to grant them independence. In fact, if you look in history, all of the countries in the world that have become independent, I can't think of any of them that asked permission other than Scotland. People don't ask permission for a right we already have. It's not in the gift of someone else to give you what is an inalienable right. You already own the right to choose your government. You already own the right to choose your leaders. You should never cede that authority to anyone, and you should never be accepting of a Scottish government that cedes your authority to a Westminster government.
Yes, I totally agree. They talk about the sovereignty of the Scottish people, but it's just a soundbite to them. They don't mean it, because if they meant it, they wouldn't be begging Westminster for a Section 30. It seems to be you have to be a certain type of politician to get on in politics now. The careerist one with their empty promises and empty sound bites.
I'm really aware that I don't look polished and slick, and I don't want to be. We've got enough of that. The Parliament of Holyrood and in Westminster is absolutely chock of slick, polished, professional politicians. How's that delivering for you so far?
Not good. They haven't really delivered anything. I wanted them to deliver independence. I voted for them many, many times in the expectation that they will deliver independence. And now I have lost that. hope. I know they won't. I know they've no intention. They've now kicked it down 5 years down the road. And I also know that Scotland is crying out for independence, and we can be led to independence. And that's why I'm putting my faith in that Alba party. So back to your campaign to be deputy leader of the Alba party. What do you think you can bring to the position?
I think I can bring to the position of deputy leader. It's the traditional roles of that, which is obviously to support the leader of the party in the work that they do, broadcasting and advocating for our vision, for Alba's vision for the future. I think the person, though, in my view, brings the power to the position. The position doesn't bring power to the person. So we're a new party. We have the chance to shape our structures and make sure that those positions reflect the roles we want the party to carry out. In my view, that could be broadened to be a bridge between the membership and the leadership, to be someone who's constantly taking a temperature check to make sure that the visions that we're advocating on behalf of the Alba party are actually the visions and aspirations of the broad membership of our party. I think also a very big plus to the position is that you can, for those conversations we were having earlier about being in a position of influence, to make sure that your voice is in there, helping to shape the future direction of the party, including the manifesto, helping to make sure that the branch structures, LACUS structures, all get a chance to feed into that manifesto. So, as I say, it broadly represents the aspirations and the visions of the broad majority of the membership. The membership voices have to be represented and they have to be heard. Much like the declaration at Arbo, it's that acceptance that the membership's voice is sovereign.
That sounds great. Oh, I like that. So the Alba party will be like Scotland, where the members are sovereign. So, of course, you'll be supporting the leader, Alex Salmond, who's come back into Scottish politics to rescue the independence movement, in my opinion. So what will that experience be like?
To have someone with such a depth of institutional knowledge, both nationally and internationally, with a real grasp, not just on the political structures and how we can use those to deliver independence, but I think more importantly, that the fight, the will and the belief that we can deliver it. And if the leadership doesn't have that belief, it's almost impossible to convince anyone else. And I think that's what Alex Salmond had in spades, and had in 2014 in spades. And that's what we need. We need someone who can inspire the people in Scotland to believe that we can do it. Nothing about being in the union is inevitable. We don't have to accept no change. We don't have to accept permanent devolution and a permanent executive in Scotland identifying as a government. Let's be an actual government. We can do it. Alex believes it. I believe it. Everyone in Alba believes it. So let's do their job and go out and convince the rest of Scotland to believe it.
Yes, Michelle, I think that's what we all want to hear and what we're going to try and do over the next months and years. And hopefully it won't be long before Scotland is an independent country. Thanks to Michelle for joining us, and thanks for watching Through a Scottish Prism. I hope this episode has been very informative and will help you make your choice for Deputy Leader of Alba. Goodbye.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.